The fog clung to the narrow streets of Montmartre like a shroud, muffling footsteps and dimming the weak glow of gas lamps. It was the kind of night that made even the boldest souls hurry home, as if the mist itself carried whispered secrets and unseen threats. At the edge of a forgotten alley, in a crumbling tenement building, a crime unfolded that would baffle even the most seasoned minds. A disappearance so complete, so inexplicable, that it seemed as though the fog had swallowed a man whole. It began with a scream, sharp and fleeting, piercing the damp air just past midnight. Madame Claire Du Bois, a weary woman of 60 who lived on the 3rd floor of the decrepit building, heard it first. She had been awake, as she often was, nursing a cup of bitter tea and fretting over unpaid bills. The scream came from below, from the tiny apartment of Monsieur Etienne Moreau, a reclusive clerk who kept to himself and spoke to no one. Madame Du Bois hesitated, her gnarled hands trembling as she clutched her shawl. Screams in this part of Paris weren't uncommon. Drunken brawls, desperate arguments, but this one was different. It carried a raw edge of terror that made her skin prickle. She shuffled to her door, cracked it open, and peered into the dimly lit hallway. The building was silent now, unnaturally so, as if the fog outside had seeped through the walls and smothered every sound. Against her better judgment, she descended the creaking stairs, her slippers scuffing against the worn wood. When she reached Moreau's door on the ground floor, it stood ajar, a sliver of flickering light spilling into the hall. Her breath caught. She called out softly, "Monsieur Moreau, are you there?" No answer. With a trembling hand, she pushed the door wider. The room was small, barely furnished, a sagging bed against one wall, a chipped table with a single kerosene lamp burning low, and the rickety chair tipped over as if someone had left in a hurry. But it wasn't the sparseness that made her gasp. It was the state of the window, or rather, the iron bars across it. They were bent, twisted outward as if some tremendous force had wrenched them apart from the inside. Shards of glass littered the floor, and beyond the broken window, the fog swirled, thick and impenetrable. Of Monsieur Moreau, there was no sign. Not a coat, not a shoe. Nothing to suggest where he had gone or how he had managed to escape through a window that opened onto a sheer 3-story drop into the alley below. Madame Du Bois staggered back, her cries rousing the other tenants. Soon, the building buzzed with muttered theories and fearful glances. Someone fetched the police, though no one expected much from them in a neighborhood like this. By the time Inspector Jules Maigret arrived at dawn, the fog had barely lifted, casting the alley in a ghostly grey. Maigret was not a man easily rattled, stocky, with a heavy overcoat and a pipe perpetually clenched between his teeth. He had seen enough of Paris's underbelly to remain unshaken by most crimes. But as he stood in Moreau's cramped apartment, surveying the bent bars and the shattered glass, even he felt a flicker of unease. He began with the obvious, questioning Madame Du Bois and the other tenants. Their stories varied in detail, but agreed on one thing. No one had seen or heard Moreau. After that single, chilling scream, the man had no enemies, no friends, no visitors. He was a ghost among the living, a clerk at a small accounting firm who, trudged to work each morning and returned each night without a word to anyone. Margaret examined the room meticulously. There was no blood, no sign of a struggle beyond the overturned chair. The bed was unmade, the sheets crumpled as if Moreau had been lying in them when something or someone interrupted his rest. On the table, beneath the lamp, sat a single oddity, a brass key, small and unremarkable, with no tag or label to indicate what it might unlock. It seemed out of place in the otherwise barren room, and Margaret tucked it into his pocket with a frown, a clue, perhaps, though to what? He couldn't yet fathom. He moved to the window, crouching to inspect the bars. They were old, rusted in places, but the force required to bend them so drastically was staggering. He poked his head through the jagged opening, peering down into the alley. The drop was sheer, the cobblestones below slick with moisture. No ladder, no rope, no footprints in the thin layer of mud. If Moreau had somehow climbed out, he had done so without leaving a trace and without breaking his neck in the fall. Margaret straightened, puffing on his pipe. The fog seemed to press closer, obscuring the opposite buildings, as if taunting him with its opacity. He turned his attention to the door. It had been locked from the inside. When Madame Dubois arrived, the key still in the bolt, she swore she hadn't touched it, and Margaret believed her fear was too genuine to be feigned. So, a locked room, a barred window torn open, and a man vanished into thin air. It was the kind of case that could drive a lesser detective to distraction. But Margaret's mind worked like a machine, sifting through impossibilities to find the thread of truth. He questioned the neighbors more closely now, pressing for any detail about Moreau's habits. A young seamstress from the second floor mentioned that she'd once seen him carrying a parcel wrapped in brown paper, though she couldn't say what was inside. An old man who sold newspapers at the corner recalled that Moreau sometimes lingered near the canal on his way home, staring into the water as if lost in thought. None of it amounted to much, but Margaret filed every scrap away. He knew from experience that the smallest inconsistency could crack a case wide open. As the morning wore on, he sent a constable to Moreau's workplace to inquire about his duties and any potential troubles. Meanwhile, he returned to the alley, pacing the length of it in search of anything the fog might have hidden. At the far end, near a pile of discarded crates, he spotted something glinting faintly in the murky shard of glass, identical to those in Moreau's room. It lay far from the window, too far to have fallen naturally. Margaret's eyes narrowed. Someone had been here, moving evidence. Or perhaps something more had happened in this alley than a simple disappearance. He stood there for a long moment, the fog curling around him, the brass key heavy in his pocket. The crime was baffling, almost theatrical in its impossibility. A man couldn't vanish through bent bars into a 3-story drop, nor could he evaporate from a locked room. Yet Moreau was gone, and the scream Madame Dubois had heard lingered in Margaret's mind like an echo he couldn't shake. This was no ordinary disappearance. It was a puzzle, carefully constructed, and Margaret knew that somewhere in the fog, in the silence of Montmartre's forgotten corners, lay the answer. He lit his pipe again, the smoke mingling with the mist, and resolved to find it no matter how deeply the shadows conspired to hide the truth. The shard of glass in the alley glinted like a tiny, malevolent eye as Inspector Maigret bent to pick it up, careful not to disturb the surrounding mud. He turned it over in his gloved fingers, noting the jagged edge, identical to those scattered beneath Moreau's shattered window. It was too far from the apartment to have landed here by chance. Someone had carried it, or something more had transpired in this damp, forgotten corner of Montmartre. The fog still hung heavy, cloaking the alley in a veil of mystery. But Maigret's mind was already at work, piecing together fragments of a puzzle that seemed designed to confound. He slipped the shard into a small envelope and tucked it into his coat alongside the brass key from Moreau's table. His pipe glowed faintly as he puffed, the smoke curling upward to join the mist. The alley yielded no further clues, though he paced its length once more, eyes scanning every shadow for a footprint, a scrape, anything to suggest a presence beyond. The vanished clerk, nothing. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional drip of condensation from a sagging gutter. Maigret's thoughts returned to the bent bars, the locked door, the scream. This wasn't a haphazard crime. It was calculated, almost performative, as if someone wanted to ensure it would be noticed and remembered. Back at the tenement, the local gendarmes had begun their routine procedures, trudging through the building with the weary efficiency of men who'd seen too many unsolvable cases in neighborhoods like this. They questioned tenants again, scribbled notes, and muttered about vagrants or petty grudges, though none of their theories accounted for the sheer impossibility of Moreau's disappearance. Maigret watched them from the doorway of the missing man's apartment, his expression unreadable. He had little patience for routine when instinct told him the truth lay elsewhere, in the details others overlooked. He stepped back into the cramped room, his heavy boots scuffing against the floorboards, and let his gaze wander with deliberate slowness. The kerosene lamp still flickered on the table, casting long shadows across the walls. The overturned chair remained as it had been, a silent witness to whatever had unfolded. Maigret's eyes lingered on the bed, the crumpled sheets suggesting a sudden interruption. He approached, crouching to inspect the thin mattress beneath it. Pressed against the wall as if deliberately hidden was a small notebook, its leather cover worn and stained. He straightened, flipping it open with a gloved hand. The pages were filled with cramped, frantic handwriting numbers, mostly arranged in columns that meant nothing to him at first glance. But near the back, a single line stood out, scrawled in a shakier hand. Asterisk they know. Canal at dusk. Asterisk. Maigret's brow furrowed. It was cryptic, but it tied to the old newspaper vendor's recollection of Moreau lingering by the canal. A lead, perhaps, though its meaning remained elusive. He pocketed the notebook, his mind already turning over. The words, they know. Who were they? And what did they know that compelled a man to vanish or be made to vanish? Maigret's gaze drifted to the window again, to the bent bars. The force required to warp iron like that wasn't human, not. Without tools, and yet no tools had been found. He stepped closer, running a finger along the rusted metal. Something caught his eye, a faint smear of black on one bar, barely visible in the dim light. Grease, perhaps, or oil. It wasn't rust, and it hadn't been there by accident. Someone had handled these bars, manipulated them, and left a trace of their work behind. His contemplation was interrupted by a tentative knock at the door. Madame Du Bois stood there, her face pale, her hands twisting nervously in her shawl. "Inspector," she began, her voice trembling. I remembered something. I didn't think it important before, but last night, before the scream, I heard a noise, a scraping, like metal on metal, coming from down here. I thought it was rubbish bins in the alley, but now she trailed off, her eyes darting to the window as if expecting to see something or someone looming in the fog beyond. Maigret nodded, his expression calm, but his mind racing. "You're sure of the time, madam?" he asked, his tone gentle but probing. "Yes, just before midnight. Minutes before the scream." "I swear it," he thanked her, watching as she retreated down the hall, her footsteps uneven with lingering fear. Metal on metal. It aligned with the grease on the bars, suggested tampering. Someone had been here, preparing this stage, long before Moreau's cry cut through the night. But why? And how did a man disappear from a locked room without leaving a trace below? Maigret stepped outside to confer with the constable he'd sent to Moreau's workplace. The young officer returned with a thin file and a furrowed brow. "Sir, the firm says Moreau was a model employee, quiet, diligent, no complaints. But his supervisor did mention he'd seemed distracted. Lately, jumpy even, kept looking over his shoulder, as if expecting someone. And there's this." The constable handed over a slip of paper, a receipt for a locksmith dated 2 weeks prior. No explanation, no context, just a name and an amount paid. Maigret's fingers brushed the brass key in his pocket. A connection, tenuous but undeniable. Had Moreau changed a lock, or acquired a key to something or somewhere else? He dismissed the constable and lingered in the alley once more, the fog beginning to thin as the morning dragged into afternoon. The shard of glass, the notebook, the grease, the key, each piece felt like a breadcrumb leading somewhere. But the path was still obscured. His thoughts were interrupted again, this time by a young boy, no older than 10. Who darted from a nearby doorway clutching a crumpled newspaper. "Monsieur Inspector," the boy chirped, eyes wide with the thrill of importance. "I saw something last night by the canal before it got too dark. A man, like Monsieur Moreau, arguing with another. Couldn't hear much, but the other fella looked angry, shaking his fist. Then they split, quick-like, into the fog." Maigret crouched to the boy's level, offering a coin and a nod. "You're sure it was Moreau?" The boy hesitated, then nodded. "Pretty sure. Same coat, same slump in the shoulders. I see him pass by most days." Maigret straightened, his pipe cold now, but his mind alight. Another witness tying Moreau to the canal. And now an argument, a crack in the image of the reclusive, friendless clerk. Someone had a grudge, or a secret worth fighting over. He glanced back at the tenement, at the bent bars glinting faintly. Through the mist, the first signs of deception were emerging, like shapes in the fog, indistinct, unsettling. Whoever had orchestrated this disappearance whether Moreau himself or another had taken pains to make it seem impossible. But Maigret knew better. Nothing was impossible, not in Paris, not even in a city where the shadows seemed to breathe. He turned toward the canal, resolved to follow this thread, knowing that somewhere in the murky water, or the words of that notebook, a lie was waiting to be uncovered. The fog over Montmartre had begun to lift as the afternoon deepened, though a stubborn haze still clung to the edges of the canal, blurring the line between water and sky. Inspector Maigret trudged along the narrow path that bordered the sluggish, murky waterway, his heavy overcoat brushing against overgrown weeds. The canal was a forgotten vein of Paris, frequented by bargemen, vagrants, and those with secrets to drown. It was here, according to the young boy and the old newspaper vendor, that Moreau had been seen in the days before his disappearance, lingering, anxious, and now, apparently, arguing with an unknown figure. Maigret's pipe glowed faintly as he puffed, his mind turning over the fragments he'd gathered, the bent bars, the brass key, the cryptic note in the notebook, and the smear of grease that hinted at tampering. Each piece pointed to a careful design, a hidden truth, and the canal felt like the next step in unraveling it. He started with the regulars along the water's edge, those who might have seen or heard something in the twilight hours before Moreau vanished. Near a sagging dock, he found a grizzled bargeman, Pierre Lefebvre, hauling crates with hands roughened by years of labor. The man squinted at Maigret's badge, his weathered face tightening with wariness, though he agreed to talk. I saw Moreau often enough, Lefebvre grunted, wiping sweat from his brow. Always alone, staring into the water like it owed him something. Last time was 2 nights ago, maybe just before dusk. He wasn't himself, kept glancing around, jumpy as a rat, didn't say a word to me, just hurried off toward the bridge. Maigret nodded, noting the timing close to when the boy had seen the argument. Did you see anyone with him? Anyone following? Lefebvre hesitated, his eyes flickering toward the canal as if the answer might float up from its depths. No one with him, not then. But there was a fella loitering by the bridge after Moreau passed. Tall, thin, wearing a dark cap pulled low. Didn't think much of it, plenty of strange types round here. Could have been nothing. His tone was too casual, his shrug too practiced, and Maigret sensed the man was holding back. He pressed, gently, asking if the stranger had lingered long or spoken to anyone. But Lefebvre only shook his head, muttering about having work to do before turning back to his crates. The inspector let him go for now, though the bargeman's reluctance stuck with him like a burr. Some men lied out of fear, others out of guilt, and Maigret wasn't yet sure which applied here. Further along the canal, under the shadow of a rusted iron bridge, he found a street hawker named Margot, a weary woman in her 40s who sold bruised apples and wilted flowers from a rickety cart. Her sharp eyes sized Maigret up before he even flashed his badge, and she crossed her arms with a smirk. Looking for that clerk, eh? The one who's gone missing. I knew he'd come to a bad end. Always skulking about, pale as a ghost. I saw him here last night, round dusk, just as the fog started rolling in thick. He was talking to someone, a man, older, with a limp. Couldn't hear what they said. But Moreau looked scared, kept shaking his head like he wanted no part of it. Then the other fella grabbed his arm, rough-like, and they moved off quick toward the tenement streets. Her story clashed with Lefever's no mention of a tall, thin stranger, but instead an older man with a limp. And the timing was off, placing the encounter later, closer to the scream Madame Dubois had heard. Maigret's brow furrowed as he lit his pipe again, the smoke curling into the damp air. "You're sure of the time, madam? And the limp notice anything else about this man?" Margot hesitated, her smirk fading for a fleeting second before she caught herself. "Sure as I can be. Didn't get a good look at the other fella, fog was too thick. And I've got my own business to mind. But I know what I saw. Moreau was in a panic. I'll swear to that." She spoke with a practiced confidence, but her fingers twitched as she rearranged her wilted flowers, a nervous tic that Maigret didn't miss. She was too eager to help, too quick with her details, as if she'd rehearsed them. He thanked her quietly, his gaze lingering on her cart as he moved on. Witnesses often embroidered the truth, but contradictions like these, different descriptions, different times hinted at something deeper, a veil of deception woven by someone, or several someones. He circled back toward the tenement, stopping at the corner where the old newspaper vendor had first mentioned Moreau's Canal visits. The vendor, a hunched man named Gaston with a face like crumpled parchments, was sorting his stacks when Maigret approached. Gaston's watery eyes brightened at the chance to retell his tale, though his version shifted slightly from the morning's account. "Oh, Inspector, I saw Moreau by the canal plenty. Last time was yesterday, late afternoon. He was alone, passing near the bridge, muttering to himself. Looked like a man with the devil on his tail. Didn't see no one with him, though swear it. But there's always folks hanging round there, shifty types. Could have missed someone in the fog." Maigret nodded, though Gaston's insistence on seeing no companion jarred against the boy's citing of an argument, and Margot's story of the limping man. The old vendor seemed genuine, his eagerness born of loneliness rather than guile. But his words muddied the timeline further. 3 witnesses, 3 versions of events, each laced with half-truths or omissions. Maigret's mind worked steadily, sifting through the dissonance. Someone was lying, or several were, and the why of it gnawed at him. Was it to protect Moreau, or themselves, or was there a larger game at play? One tied to the bent bars and the vanished man's cryptic note. They know. Canal at dusk, his final stop was back at the accounting firm where Moreau had worked. A drab building tucked among warehouses near the canal's northern bend. The supervisor, a pinched-faced man named Monsieur Bissett, greeted Maigret with a mix of irritation and unease, clearly displeased at the disruption. Moreau was reliable, if unremarkable. Bissett sniffed, adjusting his spectacles. Never caused trouble, never stood out. Though, these last few weeks, he was distractible, made errors in his ledgers minor, but unusual for him. I assumed personal troubles. He mentioned nothing. Of course he barely spoke. Last I saw him was yesterday. Morning when he left for the day. Seemed in a hurry, paler than usual. But that's all I can say. Margaret pressed for any sign of conflict or unusual visitors. But Bissett shook his head firmly to firmly, perhaps. No, nothing like that. We're a quiet firm. If he had enemies, it wasn't through us. Yet as he spoke, his gaze darted to a locked drawer in his desk. A fleeting glance Margaret caught before the supervisor masked it with a cough, a hidden motive, perhaps, or a fear of his own. Margaret didn't push not yet. He thanked Bissett and stepped back into the fading light, the fog beginning to creep in again as evening approached. Standing by the canal once more, Margaret felt the weight of the day's voices pressing against in the favor's reticence. Margaret's over-eagerness, Gaston's inconsistencies, Bissett's subtle nerves. Each witness had painted a different Moreau, a different night, and somewhere in their tangled words lay a truth he hadn't yet grasped. The brass key in his pocket seemed heavier now, as did the notebook's cryptic warning. Deception hung over this case like the fog itself, obscuring motives and alibis. But Margaret knew that lies, like mist, eventually cleared under scrutiny. He puffed on his pipe, watching the water ripple in the dusk, and resolved to peel back these layers, one voice at a time, until the shadow behind Moreau's disappearance stood revealed. In the cold light of fact, the canal's dark water mirrored the creeping dusk as Inspector Margaret stood on its muddy bank, the fog once again curling around him like a living thing. The voices of the De La Favor's guarded grunts, Margaret's overly polished tale, Gaston's wavering recollections, and Bissett's tightly controlled answers swirled in his mind, each laced with half-truths and hidden fears, the brass key in his pocket and the notebooks. Cryptic scrawl, they know, Canal at dusk, weighed on him as he puffed his pipe, the smoke blending with the mist. Moreau's disappearance was no random act. It was a carefully woven knot of secrets, and the motives behind it were proving as murky as the canal itself. Margaret knew he was stepping into a maze, one where every suspect carried a reason to be tangled in this mystery, but no single path yet led to the truth. He began by retracing his steps to the tenement, where the flickering gas lamps now cast long, uneasy shadows across the alley. Madame Dubois, still jittery from the night's events, let him in with a nervous nod, her eyes darting as if expecting Moreau's ghost to appear. Margaret sat her down in her cramped third-floor room, a pot of bitter tea steaming between them, and gently probed for more. "Madam, you've lived here a long time. Did Moreau ever speak of debts? Enemies? Anyone who might have wished him harm?" She shook her head, clutching her shawl. "Never, Inspector. He was silent as a tomb. Paid his rent on time, though always in cash. Slipped under the landlord's door. But I did hear." She hesitated, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Last month, late at night, I heard arguing from his room. A man's voice, gruff, and Moreau pleading, sounding desperate. I didn't dare interfere. Thought it might be a creditor. He had that look, you know, of someone always running from something." Her words hinted at greed or coercion, a possible motive rooted in money. But who was this gruff-voiced man, and why the secrecy? Margaret filed it away, noting her fear seemed genuine, though her memory conveniently vague. He moved next to the landlord, a portly man named Monsieur Garnier, who lived in a slightly less decrepit building nearby. Garnier greeted Maigret with a forced smile, wiping greasy hands on his apron as if he'd just finished a meal, or hiding evidence of something less savory. Moreau, good tenant, no trouble. He insisted, to quickly, paid on time, kept quiet, never saw visitors, never heard a peep. Pity he's gone, though hard to fill rooms in this quarter. But when Maigret mentioned the argument Madame Dubois overheard, Garnier's smile faltered, a bead of sweat forming on his brow despite the evening chill. Arguments? Not that I recall. Tenants squabble, you know, nothing serious. Could have been anyone. His alibi was flimsy. His eagerness to dismiss the incident betraying a nervousness that hinted at complicity or fear of exposure. Perhaps he knew more about Moreau's dealings, or had a stake in them, greed again, or something. Darker, like blackmail, Maigret's next stop was the accounting firm, where Monsieur Bissett awaited under the dim glow of an office lamp. The supervisor's earlier unease had hardened into defensiveness, his fingers drumming on his desk as Maigret sat across from him. "I've told you all I know." Inspector Moreau was unremarkable, save for his recent distractions. No enemies here. But when Maigret pressed about the locked drawer he'd noticed earlier, Bissett's face tightened. Personal effects, nothing more, unrelated to this. Maigret didn't push, instead shifting to inquire about Moreau's ledgers. Any signs of financial discrepancies? Bissett admitted, with reluctance, that a small sum petty cash had gone missing weeks ago, though he hadn't blamed Moreau outright. Still, the implication hung in the air. Theft, or the suspicion of it, could breed resentment. Revenge, perhaps, from a co-worker, or Bissett himself, if he'd covered it up to avoid scandal. Maigret's gaze lingered on the drawer as he left, sensing a hidden piece of this puzzle lay within. Back at the canal, under a sky now bruised with twilight, he sought out Lefebvre again. The bargeman was unloading another crate, his movements slow, almost deliberate, as if buying time. Maigret cut straight to it. "You didn't mention an argument by the bridge, Monsieur Lefebvre, though others did. Nor did you speak of Moreau's debts or troubles. What are you keeping back?" The man's weathered face darkened, his hands pausing mid-lift. "I don't mix in others' business," he growled. "Seen plenty on this canal fights. Deals. Worse. Moreau might have owed someone. I heard whispers, but I don't pry. That tall fella I mentioned could have been a collector, or worse. I stay clear." His words pointed to fear, a motive that could drive a man to silence or betrayal. Had Lefebvre witnessed something he feared to name, or was he tied to the debt himself, protecting a secret with his reticence? Margot, the street hawker, was still at her cart near the bridge, her sharp eyes narrowing as Maigret approached. She smirked, but it didn't reach her gaze. "Back again, Inspector? I've told you what I saw, Moreau, and that limping man, Arguin. Nothing more to say." But when Maigret mentioned the discrepancies in timing and descriptions, her smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of irritation. "Fog plays tricks, don't it? I know what I saw." Maybe Moreau crossed someone, a lover's spat turned ugly, or a jealous rival. Canals full of bad blood. Her suggestion of jealousy felt like a diversion. A story spun to mislead, yet her twitchy fingers betrayed nerves, hinting she knew more, perhaps a personal stake, or a profit from pointing fingers elsewhere. As night settled over Paris, Maigret returned to the tenement alley, the fog thicker now, muffling the city's distant hum. He sat on a crate near Moreau's broken window, pipe glowing, sorting through the maze of motives. Madame Dubois hinted at creditors, a gruff voice demanding payment, greed, or coercion. Garnier's nervousness suggested complicity, perhaps a cut of illicit gains or fear of exposure. Bissett's locked drawer and the missing petty cash pointed to revenge. A workplace grievance masked as indifference. Lefebvre's silence screamed fear, a man caught between self-preservation and dangerous knowledge. Margot's shifting tales wove jealousy or personal gain, her eagerness to misdirect a shield for her own secrets. Each suspect carried a reason, a thread of motive, greed, revenge, fear, jealousy that tangled with the others, forming a web of deception round Moreau's locked room and bent bars. Maigret traced the brass key in his pocket, its purpose still elusive, and recalled the notebook's warning. They know. Who were they? And what did they know that drove a man to vanish or be vanished? Alibis crumbled under scrutiny. Connections emerged in stolen glances and half-lies. Moreau had lived a quiet life, yet his shadows were crowded with enemies, debts, and untold grudges. Maigret's mind worked like a loom, weaving these threads, seeking the pattern beneath the chaos. The truth was there, buried in this motive maze, and he would follow every twisted path through the fog, through the lies, until the web unraveled to reveal the hand that had pulled Moreau into the night. He stood, the fog swirling at his feet, and turned toward the canal once more, knowing the next step, the next lie, would bring him closer to the heart of this labyrinth. The fog clung to Montmartre's alleys as if reluctant to release its grip. On the night, wrapping Inspector Maigret in a damp, ghostly veil as he stood by the canal's edge, the maze of motives, greed from unseen creditors, revenge hinted at in workplace whispers, fear in the bargeman's silence, jealousy in the hawker's pointed tales twisted through his thoughts, each thread pulling him deeper into the mystery of Moreau's disappearance, the brass key in his pocket, and the cryptic note. They know. Canal at dusk loomed as unanswered riddles, but Maigret's steady mind refused to rush. He knew the truth hid in plain sight, obscured by lies and half-truths. And as dawn's first grey light crept over Paris, he felt the stir of a breakthrough. What seemed like one drawing near. He had returned to the tenement alley just after midnight, unable to sleep, driven by the itch of unfinished pieces. The broken window of Moreau's room stared down like a jagged eye, the bent bars taunting him with their impossibility. He'd scoured the area again, boots crunching on unseen grit, when something caught his attention near the base of the wall, a faint glint half buried in the mud. Crouching, he unearthed a small, tarnished pocket watch, its chain broken, the glass face cracked. He pried it open with a gloved finger, revealing an inscription on the inner lid. Asterisk to eat Moreau, for diligence. Bissett and Co. 1892. Margaret's pulse quickened. This was Moreau's, no doubt. A personal item dropped in haste or placed deliberately. It lay too far from the window to have fallen during a struggle inside, suggesting someone had carried it here, perhaps after the disappearance. He tucked the watch into his coat, his mind racing as the fog swirled thicker. If this was evidence of flight or foul play, it pointed outward into the alley, contradicting the locked room's enigma. Margaret hurried to the local gendarmerie, waking a bleary-eyed sergeant to confirm the watch's ownership with Bissett at the accounting firm. By mid-morning, Bissett, irritable at the early summons, verified it. Yes, that's Moreau's. Gave it to him years ago for good service. Haven't seen it since. His tone was clipped, his gaze avoiding the locked drawer Margaret had noticed before. But there was no time to press the discovery felt too urgent. The gendarmes, weary of dead ends in a neighborhood they barely policed, seized on the watch, with a fervor Margaret found premature. By noon, they'd combed the canal path beyond the alley, spurred by the boy's sighting of an argument and Margaret's tale of a limping man. Near the rusted bridge, a junior officer stumbled on a scrap of cloth snagged on a jagged poster torn sleeve, grey wool, matching the description of Moreau's coat from witnesses. The fabric bore faint smears of blood, dried and dark, sending a murmur of triumph through the ranks. The sergeant, a stout man named Dubois, clapped Margaret on the shoulder as they stood by the find. Looks like a scuffle, Inspector. Moreau argued, got roughed up, fled or was dragged along the canal. Probably fell in, or worse. Poor sod's likely at the bottom. We'll drag the water. Call off the search by nightfall if nothing turns up. Case closed, eh? Margaret puffed his pipe, his expression unreadable, though a knot of unease coiled. In his gut, the evidence fit a neat narrative. The watch dropped in flight, the bloody cloth proof of violence, the canal a convenient grave. The gendarmes buzzed with relief, eager to file reports and move on. Even Madame Dubois, summoned to confirm the cloth's resemblance to Moreau's coat, nodded tearfully, murmuring about how she'd feared such an end for the quiet man. Publicly, the authorities began to draft statements, whispering of a tragic accident or a petty robbery gone wrong. By late afternoon, reporters sniffed around, scribbling notes about a clerk lost to Paris's underbelly, and the sergeant beamed as if he'd solved the grand puzzle. But Margaret stood apart, the fog in his mind thicker than that around him. Something didn't sit right. The watch, though personal, lay too conveniently placed, almost staged, in mud undisturbed by footprints. The blood on the cloth was dry to dry for a struggle mere hours before its discovery. Given the damp night air, and the canal, dragged with nets by evening, yielded nothing, no body, no further scraps. Despite hours of effort, Margaret's instinct, honed by years of untangling deceptions, hummed with doubt. The bent bars, the locked door, the grease smear, none of it aligned with a simple brawl by the water. This breakthrough felt like a false victory, a distraction dangled to lull the hunt. He returned to the alley alone as dusk fell, the tenement looming in silence. The watch ticked faintly in his pocket, a mocking reminder of time slipping away. He traced the path from the window to where it was found, noting again the lack of scuff marks or signs of a chase. His thoughts drifted to the notebook's warning, "They know," and the key, still untested. Whoever orchestrated this, whether Moreau himself or another, had anticipated the watcher's impact, counting on eager eyes to leap at an easy answer. The real criminal, Maigret sensed, lurked in the shadows of this fog, watching, waiting for the clamor to die down. Was it Lefebvre, hiding behind fear of Canal debts? Margot, weaving tales to shield her own stake? Bissett, with his locked secrets? Or someone yet unseen, manipulating every move? Maigret crouched by the canal again, the water black as ink under the fading light. He relit his pipe, smoke curling upward, and let the day's events settle. The gendarme's haste gnawed at him, closing a case without a body, without motive, felt like surrender. He recalled Bissett's twitch at the watcher's mention, Margot's overeager stories shifting. With each telling, Lefebvre's reluctance to name names. The web of deception hadn't loosened with this find. It had tightened, ensnaring the unwary in a false resolution. Maigret's gaze hardened. He wouldn't be fooled by this sleight of hand. Somewhere in Montmartre's forgotten corners, behind locked doors or whispered lies, the true hand behind Moreau's vanishing waited, biding time for the next strike. He stood, the fog pressing close, and turned back toward the accounting firm, determined to confront Bissett again about that drawer. The key in his pocket seemed to burn, a silent challenge. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The authorities might crow of victory, but Maigret knew the game was still afoot, and he would play it to the end, through every false lead and shadowed lie, until the fog lifted to reveal the predator still coiled in wait. The fog hung low over Montmartre as Inspector Maigret trudged through the dim streets. The false victory of the pocket watch and bloody cloth still souring his thoughts. The gendarme's eagerness to close Moreau's case grated on him. Their neat narrative of a canal brawl ignoring the locked room, the bent bars, and the grease smear that whispered of premeditation, the brass key in his pocket, and the cryptic note, "They know," Canal at dusk, remained unsolved riddles, and his instinct told him the real predator still lurked unseen, waiting for the dust to settle. As night deepened, he headed toward Bissett's accounting firm, determined to confront the supervisor about that locked drawer, certain it held a piece of the puzzle. But beneath his resolve, a nagging unease stirred something overlooked. A shadow from beyond the present was clawing its way to the surface. He arrived at the firm just as the last gas lamps flared to life along the warehouse district, casting jagged shadows across the grimy building. Bissett was still there, hunched over ledgers under a flickering lamp, his pinched face tightening. At Maigret's unannounced return, "Inspector, I've told you everything," he snapped, his voice edged with irritation or fear. "It's late. Surely this can wait." But Maigret's gaze was fixed on the locked drawer, and he didn't mince words. "Open it, monsieur. Now. I've no patience for games, and you've dodged this long enough." Bissett hesitated, his fingers trembling as he adjusted his spectacles, but under Maigret's unflinching stare, he relented. With a reluctant sigh, He produced a small key from his vest and unlocked the drawer, sliding it open to reveal a thin stack of papers and a faded photograph. Maigret leaned in, his pipe cold in his mouth, as he lifted the photo. It showed a group of men outside a warehouse by the canal, their faces stern. Dated over a decade ago, among them stood a younger Bissett, and beside him, a man with familiar, haunted eyes, Moreau, unmistakable even in grainy sepia. But it was the third figure that caught Maigret's attention. A tall, thin man with a dark cap pulled low, eerily matching Lefever's description of the stranger by the bridge. Scrawled on the back in faint pencil were the words, Canal, Syndicate, 83. A chill crept down Maigret's spine. He flipped through the paper's old invoices, coded notes, references to shipments along the canal. Bissett shifted uncomfortably as Maigret's eyes bored into him. Explain this, monsieur. What's the syndicate? And what ties you to Moreau and this man? He tapped the photo, his tone calm but unyielding. Bissett's bravado crumbled, his voice dropping to a hoarse whisper. It's ancient history, Inspector. A mistake. Years ago, some of us dabbled in smuggling along the canal. Small things, liquor, tobacco, nothing violent. Moreau was just a clerk then, cooked the books to hide discrepancies. We disbanded after a close call with the law, swore to bury it. I thought it was done. But Moreau, lately, he was agitated, muttering about old debts resurfacing. I kept these as insurance, in case anyone tried to drag me back in. I don't know who that tall man is now, haven't seen him in years. Maigret's mind raced. A forgotten case, a shadow from the past, now loomed over Moreau's disappearance. Smuggling tied Bissett and Moreau, and perhaps others, in a web of buried secrets worth silencing a man for. But Bissett's fear seemed genuine. His role more pawn than predator. Maigret pocketed the photo, leaving the supervisor pale and sweating, and stepped back into the fog-laden night. The Canal Syndicate of 83 wasn't just a relic. It was a motive, a ghost stirring old grudges or unpaid debts into the present. He headed to the canal, driven by the photo's echo of Lefever's tale. The bargeman was near his dock, mending a net under a weak lantern, his weathered face hardening at Maigret's approach. I've got nothing more, Inspector, he growled. But Maigret held up the photo, pointing to the tall man in the cap. Lefever's hands stilled, his jaw tightening. After a long silence, he muttered, That's Henry Vasa. Ran the syndicate back then. A cold bastard. Thought he'd left Paris after the group fell apart, prison rumor. Or worse, if he's back, it's trouble. I ferried crates for them once, years ago. Quit when it got too risky. Moreau was in deep, though knew too much. If Vasa's around, he's settling scores. Maigret nodded, piecing it together. Lefever's fear now had a name, Henry Vasa, a spectre from the syndicate. Matching the figure seen near Moreau, a hidden connection spanned the suspects. Bissett's old papers, Lefever's reluctant past, and Moreau at the center. A clerk whose ledgers hid more than numbers. But where did Margot fit, with her shifting stories? Or Garnier, the nervous landlord? Maigret pressed Lefever for more, but the bargeman clammed up, muttering about staying clear of ghosts. Still, The link was clear. Moreau's disappearance wasn't just a present crime. It was rooted in a decade-old conspiracy, a shadow of betrayal or greed resurfacing in the fog. He sought Margot next, finding her packing her cart near the bridge as dawn neared. Her smirk faded when Maigret showed the photo, asking if she recognized Vasa. Her eyes flickered with recognition before she masked it, shrugging. Might have seen him. Long time back. Canals always had dark types. I told you, Moreau. Crossed someone, maybe it's him. I don't dig into old dirt. But her twitchy fingers and forced nonchalance betrayed her. Maigret suspected she'd worked the fringes of the syndicate. Perhaps as a lookout or informant, her tales meant to steer him off the scent of a deeper truth. Another thread tied to the past, another suspect bound by buried history. Back at the tenement, Maigret confronted Garnier, the landlord, showing the photo as morning light crept through grimy windows. Garnier's greasy hands shook. His denial. Thin. Don't know him, Inspector. Never mixed in Canal business. But his eyes lingered too long on Vasa's face, sweat beading despite the chill. Maigret leaned in. You've lied before, monsieur. Moreau argued with someone in his room, someone gruff. Desperate. Was it Vasa? Collecting on old debts? Garnier stammered, admitting he'd overheard whispers of old business, but swore he stayed out of it. Fear, again, tied him to the syndicate's shadow, perhaps extorted to silence or complicity. Maigret stood in the alley as the fog thinned with the rising sun, the photo heavy in his hand. The Canal syndicate of 83 bound Bisset, Lefebvre, Margot, Garnier, and Moreau in a forgotten web, resurfacing with Vasa's phantom presence, a past crime, smuggling, betrayal, or worse, had birthed a motive for the present, whether revenge for old betrayals or silencing a witness like Moreau, who knew too much. The bent bars, the locked room, the staged clues all screamed of a mind orchestrating revenge or cover-up. Rooted in history, no one dared speak aloud. He lit his pipe, smoke curling into the grey dawn, the brass key still a nagging riddle. Vasa, the tall man in the cap, was the shadow behind this. Maigret felt it in his bones, a predator from the past, striking from the fog. But where was he? And what final move awaited? The crime wasn't just Moreau's vanishing, it was a reckoning. Delayed by years, its roots buried deep in Paris's underbelly. Maigret turned toward the Canal once more, resolved to unearth every buried secret. Knowing the past's shadows held the key to piercing the present's veil. The dawn light crept over Montmartre, thinning the fog into ghostly wisps as Inspector Maigret stood in the tenement alley, the weight of the past pressing against him. The Canal syndicate of 83, a buried history of smuggling and secret styed Moreau, Bisset, Lefebvre, Margot, and Garnier in a web of old debts and unspoken fears, with the shadow of Henry Vasa, the tall man in the dark cap, looming as the likely orchestrator of Moreau's disappearance. The bent bars, the locked room, the staged clues like the pocket watch all pointed to a calculated strike, rooted in a decade-old grudge or cover-up. The brass key in Maigret's pocket and the cryptic note, they know, Canal at dusk, still eluded explanation. But he knew conventional questioning had reached its limit. The suspect's lies were to practiced, their silences to guarded. As the morning chill bit into his bones, Maigret resolved to employ an unconventional tactic, a subtle trap to crack the veneer of deception hiding the truth. He began by returning to the canal, where the water lay still under the grey sky, its surface a mirror to the city's hidden sins. His mind churned over the fragments grease on the bars, the key's unknown lock, the syndicate's lingering spectre. Direct confrontation had yielded half-truths at best. He needed to unsettle the suspects, to provoke a reaction that might betray more than words. Maigret decided on a psychological gambit, a staged revelation designed to test character and expose hidden nerves. He would plant a seed of doubt, claiming a breakthrough that didn't yet exist, and watch whose facade crumbled under the pressure of imagined exposure. His first stop was Lefebvre, the bargeman whose fear of Vasa's return had been palpable. Maigret found him near his dock, hauling ropes with the wary rhythm of a man expecting trouble. The inspector approached casually, pipe glowing as he puffed and leaned against a post. "Monsieur Lefebvre, I've come across something interesting," he began, his tone deliberately vague, almost conversational. "A witness reliable. Mind you claims to have seen Vasa here, by this very dock, the night Moreau vanished, not just passing through, but speaking with someone. We're close to confirming it was you. Care to clarify before I dig deeper?" Lefebvre's hands froze mid-knot, the rope slipping slightly as his weathered face paled. His eyes darted to the canal, then back to Maigret, a sheen of sweat breaking despite the cold. "That's nonsense, Inspector," he rasped, his voice tighter than before. "I told you. I stay clear of old ghosts like Vasa. Ain't seen him in years. And I wasn't at no dock talks that night. You've got the wrong man." But his denial was too sharp, his fingers trembling as he resumed tying the rope, fumbling in a way that betrayed raw panic. Maigret noted that Lefebvre's fear wasn't just of Vasa's name, but of being tied to him in the present. It hinted at a meeting, or at least knowledge of one, though the bargeman's lips stayed sealed. Maigret tipped his hat and moved on, leaving the seed to fester. Next, he sought Margot near the bridge, her cart already set with wilting flowers as the morning market stirred. Her sharp eyes narrowed at his approach, but Maigret kept his demeanor light, almost dismissive, as he lit his pipe. "Madam, I've had an interesting tip," he said, watching her closely. "We've traced a shipment told syndicate business from 83 resurfacing the night Moreau disappeared. Someone saw a woman by the canal, passing a message, and the description fits you rather well. I'm inclined to believe it, unless you've a better story." Margot's smirk flickered, her hands pausing mid-arrangement of her wares. A flash of something anger or fear crossed her face before she forced a laugh. Too loud for the quiet morning. "Me, Inspector. I hawk flowers, not secrets. You've been fed a tall tale. I wasn't near no shipments, old or new, that night. Stick to real clues, eh?" But her bravado couldn't mask the way her gaze darted past him, scanning the crowd, as if expecting a threat to emerge. Her reaction wasn't guilt outright, but unease, a subtle crack in her polished deflection. Margaret thanked her mildly, letting her stew in the implication. Sensing she knew more about Canal dealings past or present than she'd admitted, he moved to visit at the accounting firm, catching the supervisor mid-morning as he shuffled. Ledgers. Visit's irritation at another visit melted into visible nerves. When Margaret leaned across the desk, voice low, "Monsieur, I've uncovered a recorder ledger entry, dated the night of Moreau's vanishing, linking a payment to Vasa through this very firm. It's damning, unless you can explain why your name's tied to it. Shall we discuss before I take it higher?" Bissett's spectacles slipped as his hand jerked, knocking a pen to the floor. His protest came to fast, to shrill. "That's impossible. I've no dealings with Vasa. Not now. Not ever again. You've got forged nonsense. Inspector, or a mistake. Check your sources." Yet his eyes betrayed him. Flitting to the locked drawer now emptied by Margaret's earlier demand as if fearing more secrets might spill, the crack was there. A desperate need to distance himself from a name that clearly still haunted him. Margaret nodded, impassive, and left without pressing further. The bait set. Lastly, he returned to Garnier, the landlord, finding him polishing a cracked mirror in his cramped office near the tenement. Margaret's approach was softer here, almost sympathetic, as he dangled the bait. "Monsieur Garnier, I've a witness placing Vasa at this building the night Moreau vanished arguing. Just as Madame Dubois heard, we're near to proving. You let him in, perhaps for a price. Speak now, before it's official." Garnier's polishing rag dropped, his greasy hands shaking as his face drained of color. No, Inspector, I'd never. I don't know Vasa, never seen him. I lock up tight. Always ask anyone. Someone's lying to you." His voice cracked, his denial frantic, and Margaret caught the scent of terror, not just of accusation, but of Vasa himself. A deeper crack, a man caught between old loyalties or threats. Unable to hide his dread dot as the afternoon waned, Margaret lingered by the canal, the fog creeping back with the chill. His unconventional tactic, a fabricated breakthrough, tailored to each suspect's fears, had worked better than expected. Lefever's trembling hands, Margaret's fleeting panic, Bissett's shrill denial. Garnier's desperate terror each revealed a subtle fracture in their carefully built walls. None had confessed outright, but their reactions painted a clearer picture. Vasa's shadow loomed over them all, a name from the past that still wielded power, tying them to Moreau's fate. Margaret puffed his pipe, the brass key heavy in his pocket, knowing he'd stirred the nest. The question now was whose crack would widen first, whose deception would crumble under the weight of this unseen threat. He turned toward the tenement once more, the fog swirling at his heels, ready to exploit these fissures. Sensing the unconventional had brought him one step closer to the predator hiding in plain sight. The fog over Montmartre thickened as the afternoon bled into evening, casting a pall over the narrow streets and the sluggish canal where Inspector Margaret stood, his pipe glowing faintly in the damp air. His unconventional tactica fabricated. Claim of a breakthrough involving Vasa had rattled the suspects, exposing cracks in their carefully guarded facades. Lefever's trembling hands, Margaret's fleeting panic, Bissett's shrill denial, and Garnier's desperate terror all pointed to a shared fear of the syndicate's old enforcer, a shadow from the past orchestrating Moreau's disappearance. The brass key in Maigret's pocket and the cryptic note, "They know, Canal at dusk," remained unsolved, but he felt the case gaining momentum. The fissures in the suspect's lies widening under pressure. Yet, as he turned back toward the tenement, a creeping unease warned him that the predator lurking in the fog wasn't done playing games. He had resolved to revisit the tenement alley, to scour Moreau's room once more for anything overlooked, and to secure the evidence he'd gathered: the photograph of the Canal syndicate, the notebook with its cryptic warning, the pocket watch, and the shard of glass from the alley. These fragments, though disparate, formed the backbone of his case, linking the present crime to a buried history of smuggling and betrayal. Maigret kept them close, stored in a locked satchel he carried, knowing their value to whoever sought to silence the truth. As he approached the crumbling building, the gas lamps flickered weakly, casting long shadows across the cobblestones, and a prickle of instinct told him something was amiss. He climbed the creaking stairs to Madame Dubois's room, where he'd left a constable earlier to guard the scene while he pressed the suspects. The young officer, a lanky man named Remy, stood by the door, rubbing his hands against the chill, his face sheepish as Maigret neared. "Sir, there's been a problem," Remy stammered. Avoiding eye contact, I stepped out for just a moment, needed air. The fog's suffocating up here, and when I returned, the room was disturbed. I swear I wasn't gone long, 10 minutes at most. Maigret's jaw tightened, a cold knot forming in his gut as he shouldered past the constable into Moreau's cramped apartment. The space, already sparse, now bore signs of intrusion. The kerosene lamp on the table had been overturned, its oil pooling on the floorboards. Though thankfully unlit, the mattress, previously searched, was slashed open, stuffing spilling out, like pale entrails. Worst of all, the small tin box where Maigret had stored duplicate notes and sketches of the evidence left here temporarily while he carried the originals had been pried open, its contents gone. The detailed drawing of the bent bars, notes on the grease smear, and a transcribed copy of the notebook's warning had vanished, stolen under the constable's negligent watch. He rounded on Remy, his voice low but laced with steel. 10 minutes, you say? Enough time for someone to gut this room and walk off with the case's foundation. Who passed by? Any sounds? Shadows? Remy shuffled, muttering about hearing faint footsteps but seeing no one. Blaming the fog for obscuring the hall, Maigret waved him off with a curt nod. Suppressing the urge to berate further negligence wasn't sabotage, though it stung all the same. Someone had been watching, waiting for a lapse, and struck with precision to bury the truth before it could fully surface. The stakes had risen sharply. This wasn't just a disappearance now, but a battle against an unseen hand determined to erase every trace of evidence. Maigret descended to the alley, checking the satchel at his side, relieved to find the original items: the photograph, notebook, key, watch, and shard still secure. But the loss of the duplicates gnawed at him. They were his backup, his record if the originals were contested or lost. He paced the cobblestones, the fog pressing close. and examined the ground near the window for signs of the intruder. A faint scuff in the mud, barely visible, suggested a boot heel larger than his own, recent given the dampness. It led toward the canal before fading into the mist, a silent taunt from whoever sought to derail him. Trust, already fragile among suspects, now felt brittle even among his own ranks. Could Remy's lapse be mere incompetence? Or was he swayed, bought, or threatened by the same shadow that haunted the syndicate's past? He headed to the gendarmerie to report the breach and secure the remaining evidence in a locker, wary now of every face around him. The sergeant, Dubois, who'd been so quick to declare the case closed with the Canal cloth, frowned at the news, muttering about vandals or petty thieves, likely kids, inspector, or scavengers in this slum. Don't read too much into it, but Maigret's gaze hardened. The precision of the theft, targeting only his notes, screamed intent, not opportunism. Someone close Lefebvre, Margot, Bissett, Garnier, or even Vasa himself knew the case's momentum, feared the cracks his psychological gambit had exposed, and acted to slow him down. Trust became a luxury he couldn't afford. Every ally, a potential leak, every shadow a threat. By nightfall, he returned to the canal, unable to shake the violation of the stolen evidence. The fog cloaked the water in secrecy, mirroring his darkening thoughts. He relit his pipe, the smoke curling upward, and considered his next move. The theft confirmed he was close for someone's comfort. It heightened the urgency to decipher the brass key and the note's warning, to connect Vasa's spectre to the present crime before more traces vanished. He revisited Lefebvre's dock, finding the bargeman gone, his boat eerily silent. At Margaret's usual spot, her cart was abandoned, a wilted flower lying trampled nearby as if she'd left in haste. Bissett's office was shuttered early, and Garnier bolted his door at Maigret's knock, claiming illness through a crack in the frame. Their sudden absences or evasions only deepened his suspicion. One of them, or an unseen agent of Vasa, was working against him, erasing footholds as fast as he gained them. Maigret stood by the bridge near the canal, the fog a suffocating blanket, feeling the weight of the vanishing evidence. The stolen notes were a blow, stripping his record of the case's intricacies, leaving him reliant on memory and the originals now under lock at the gendarmerie. But the act itself was a clue, a desperate bid to bury the truth, raising the stakes to a dangerous pitch. Whoever took them feared exposure, feared the past's shadows merging with the present's crimes. Trust crumbled further, even Remy's. Contrition felt hollow, a possible mask for complicity. Maigret's resolve hardened in the murk. He would rebuild what was lost, retrace every step, and guard every remaining fragment with his life. The predator Vasa, or his proxy thought. They gained ground, but Maigret knew this game of cat and mouse was far from over. He turned back toward the tenement, the fog swirling at his heels, ready to hunt the truth through every erased trail, knowing the next strike could come from anywhere in the mist. The fog clung to Montmartre's crooked alleys like a persistent spectre, muffling the distant clatter of the city as Inspector Maigret trudged back toward the tenement, the weight of the stolen evidence burning in his mind. The loss of his duplicate notes and sketches taken in a precise strike. During the constable's brief absence had heightened the stakes, a clear signal that someone, likely tied to Vasa and the Canal syndicate's buried past, was working to bury the truth of Moreau's disappearance. Trust had eroded to a razor's edge. Even the gendarmes, like the negligent Remy, felt unreliable in this web of deception. The brass key in Maigret's pocket and the cryptic note, "They know, Canal at dusk," remained unsolved, but secured with the original evidence at the gendarmerie. They were his lifeline. As night deepened, the fog seemed to whisper threats, and Maigret's instincts hummed with the certainty that the predator still unseen was far from finished. He had resolved to retrace every step, to rebuild the lost records from memory, and to guard against further sabotage. His path took him past the canal's murky edge, where Lefever's dock lay silent, Margaret's cart abandoned, and the echo of Vasa's shadow loomed in every ripple. The suspects' sudden absences gnawed at him, a sign they feared the cracks his psychological gambit had exposed. Reaching the tenement alley, he scanned the broken window of Moreau's room, the bent bars glinting faintly under a weak gas lamp. The scuff mark in the mud, evidence of the intruder who'd stolen his notes, still lingered, a mocking trace leading nowhere in the fog. Maigret lit his pipe, the smoke curling upward, steadying himself for the long night ahead until a piercing cry shattered the silence, slicing through the mist from the direction of the canal. His pulse quickened as he pivoted, boots crunching on the damp cobblestones, and sprinted toward the sound. The fog parted grudgingly, revealing the bridge near where Margot usually hawked her wares. Beneath its rusted iron arch, a small crowd of late-night stragglers, bargemen, and vagrants gathered, their murmurs tense. Maigret pushed through, badge flashing, and his stomach clenched at the sight before him. Slumped against the bridge's base, her weary frame crumpled like a discarded rag, lay Margot. The street hawker, her sharp eyes, once quick with deflective smirks, stared blankly into the fog, a thin trickle of blood seeping from a gash at her temple. A jagged rock, smeared with crimson, lay nearby, its weight enough to have crushed bone with a single blow. Her cart, overturned a few paces away, spilled wilted flowers across the muddy path, a silent testament to a struggle cut brutally short. Maigret crouched beside her, gloved fingers checking for a pulse he knew wouldn't be there. Her skin was still warm, the attack fresh minutes ago, perhaps, while he'd lingered in the alley. Whispers from the crowd hinted at a fleeting shadow, a tall figure melting into the fog just before the scream, but no one dared claim a clear look. The fog, as ever, shielded the predator. Maigret's mind raced, the weight of this second crime a murder now, stark and undeniable, shifting the investigation onto a treacherous new path. Moreau's disappearance had been a puzzle. Margaret's death was a warning, proof that the villain, likely Vasa or his proxy, was several steps ahead, willing to kill to silence those who knew too much. He summoned a nearby constable, barking orders to cordon the area and fetch the coroner, though he doubted the fog would yield witnesses. Beyond vague shadows, examining the scene, he noted the ferocity of the blow, personal, angry, not a random theft. Margaret's twitchy reactions to his earlier gambit, her veiled knowledge of syndicate dealings, marked her as a threat to someone. Had she been ready to crack further, to reveal Vasa's current sway, only to be silenced before she could? The overturned cart suggested she'd fought, however briefly, her nails caked with mud as if she'd clawed at her attacker. But the fog erased footprints, and the rock bore no distinct marks beyond blood. Margaret's gaze hardened. This wasn't just about solving Moreau's vanishing anymore. It was about preventing the next strike. With every suspect, and even himself potentially in the predator's sights, he sent runners to check on Lefebvre, Bissett, and Garnier, fearing they too might be targets or complicit in this escalation. Lefebvre's dock remained empty, whispers among bargemen claiming he'd fled town after dusk. Spooked by questions about Vasa, Bissett's office was still shuttered. No answer at his home. Garnier, trembling behind his bolted door, swore he'd heard nothing, though his pale face suggested he feared being next. Margaret's trust, already frayed, shattered further. Any of them could be the hand behind Margaret's murder, or the next victim of a ruthless purge tied to the syndicates. Past dot as the coroner arrived, the fog seemed to thicken, mocking his efforts to pierce its veil. Margaret stood by the canal, pipe cold now, piecing through the sharp turn this case had taken. Margaret's death confirmed his earlier dread. The stolen evidence wasn't a mere setback, but part of a broader strategy to erase every trace, every voice connected to the Canal syndicate of '83. Vasa, or whoever pulled the strings, operated with chilling precision, staying ahead of every move. The brass key and secured evidence at the gendarmerie felt like ticking liabilities now. If the villain could strike Margot so openly, could they breach even that stronghold? And who was next? Lefebvre, hiding in fear? Bissett, with his locked secrets, or Margaret himself, too close for the predator's comfort? He recalled Margaret's fleeting panic when he'd mentioned old shipments, her darting eyes as if expecting a threat. She'd known something vital, a link between Vasa's past and present, and paid the ultimate price for it. Margaret's resolve steeled in the damp night air. This murder wasn't just a twist. It was a gauntlet thrown down, a dare to keep digging despite the rising cost. He had to move faster, to unravel the key's purpose and the note's warning, before another body dropped, perhaps his own. The gendarmes, slow and skeptical, offered little aid now. This was his fight, against a foe who thrived in the fog, unseen but lethally near. Margaret turned from the canal, the crowd dispersing into the mist as Margaret's body was carted away. The stakes had soared beyond a single disappearance to a desperate race against a killer's next move. He headed toward the gendarmerie to double the guard on his evidence, the fog swirling at his back, knowing the villain watched from the shadows, calculating their next step. Every creak, every whisper in the night now carried menace, and Margaret braced himself to outwit a mind that had already proven its deadly foresight, determined to save the next life before the fog claimed it. The fog over Montmartre held fast as the night dragged on, a suffocating shroud that mirrored the tension coiling tighter round Inspector Margaret. Margaret's murder under the canal bridge, her lifeless form slumped with a crushed skull, The brutal immediacy of the attack had jolted the investigation into a desperate new phase. Moreau's disappearance was no longer a solitary puzzle. It was part of a lethal campaign, orchestrated by a predator like Vasa of the old Canal syndicate, who struck with chilling precision to silence any threat. The stolen evidence, the escalating violence, and the suspect's evasions or absences Lefever's flight, Bisset's silence. Garnier's terror underscored that the villain remained steps ahead, poised to claim another victim. Maigret trudged toward the gendarmerie to secure the remaining evidence, the brass key. The notebook with its cryptic, they know, Canal at dusk, the photograph, pocket watch, and glass shard, his resolve hardened by the need to outpace a killer. Before the fog cloaked another life dot at the gendarmerie, a squat brick building smelling of damp paper and stale coffee, he doubled the guard on the evidence locker, barking orders to a weary sergeant who muttered about overstretched resources. Maigret's trust in even his own ranks was threadbare after Remy's negligence during the theft of his duplicate notes. But he had no choice. Losing the originals would gut the case. As he sat at a scarred desk, pipe unlit in the dim lantern light, he spread out mental fragments of the chaos, the bent bars, the grease smear, Moreau's locked room, the staged clues like the watch, the syndicate's buried smuggling past, and now Margot's murder, a brutal silencing, the weight of two crimes pressed down. Yet amid the murk, his mind clung to a stubborn certainty. There was order beneath this violence, a pattern he'd overlooked, waiting to be grasped. He began by revisiting witness statements, scrawled in his notebook from memory after the theft. Madame Dubois's mention of a gruff voice arguing with Moreau weeks ago. Lefever's fear of Vasa by the Canal. Bisset's twitchy denial of current ties. Margot's darting eyes when pressed about old shipments all swirled in his thoughts. But it was a quieter detail, buried in the fog of recollection, that snagged him. The old newspaper vendor, Gaston, mentioning Moreau's habit of pacing by the canal near dusk, muttering to himself, always at the same spot under the bridge where Margot had just been killed. Gaston had dismissed it as nerves, but the repetition struck Maigret now. A ritual behavior unnoticed in the initial frenzy. Why that exact spot? Every evening, as if drawn by compulsion, and why had Margot, tied to the same canal haunts, met her end there? He flipped through the mental image of the notebook's cryptic line. They know. Canal at dusk, a warning tied to timing and place, aligning with Gaston's observation. Dusk. The canal bridge, a pattern of presence. Maigret's pulse quickened as he recalled another seemingly trivial detail from his search of Moe's room, a small, worn map of the canal, tucked beneath the mattress alongside the notebook, marked with a faint pencil circle at that very bridge. He'd noted it days ago, but shelved it as inconsequential amid the bent bars and locked door enigma. Now, it glowed with sudden clarity. Moreau wasn't just lingering. He was guarding, watching, or waiting for something at dusk under that bridge, a routine that made him predictable, vulnerable, and ultimately a target. And Margot, with her cart nearby, had likely seen too much of whatever transpired there. Maigret stood, the fog outside the gendarmerie window pressing close, and lit his pipe, the smoke curling as his thoughts aligned. The pattern emerged, subtle, but undeniable. The Canal Bridge at dusk was the nexus, the stage for whatever secret tied Moreau's disappearance to the syndicate's past. And Margot's murder. The note's warning, "They know," suggested others were aware of Moreau's habit, exploiting it to strike. The brass key in the evidence locker, still a riddle, perhaps unlocked something at that spotter's stash, a hideout, a relic of smuggling days worth killing over. The grease on the bent bars, too, clicked into place as preparation, not escape. Someone had tampered with Moreau's window long before, planning his removal, knowing his dusk routine would leave the room empty for staging. He tested the pattern further, recalling the boy's sighting of Moreau arguing near the bridge at dusk, and Margot's claim of seeing a limping man there with him, perhaps Vasa or an agent, using the predictable timing to confront or coerce. Even the pocket watch, dropped too neatly in the alley, fit as a distraction, meant to draw eyes away from the canal's true significance. Maigret's mind wove these threads, the chaos crystallizing into intent. The villain hadn't just acted on whim. They'd tracked a pattern in plain sight, Moreau's dusk vigils under the bridge, and used it to vanish him, then silenced Margot for witnessing or knowing the same ritual's purpose. The key to the case wasn't in grand gestures or hidden depths. It had been Moreau's mundane habit, overlooked until violence forced clarity. The realization grounded Maigret, cutting through the fog of deception. He hurried to the evidence locker, retrieving the brass key under the wary gaze of the guards, its heft cold against his palm. If the pattern held, it tied to the bridge at dusk a lock, a secret, a reason for murder. He checked the time. Dawn was near, dusk hours away, giving him a narrow window to prepare. But the pattern also heightened the danger if the villain exploited Moreau's routine. They'd likely noted Maigret's own dogged returns to the canal, marking him as the next obstacle. Margot's murder proved their ruthlessness. Another strike could loom at the next dusk, against him or another loose end like Lefebvre or Bissett. He pocketed the key, pipe glowing as he stepped into the thinning fog outside the gendarmerie. The city stirring with early risers. The pattern Moreau's dusk haunt under the bridge gave him a focal point, a place to test the key and unearth the secret worth killing for. But it also painted a target. The villain, steps ahead, surely, knew the bridge's pull on the investigation. Maigret's resolve hardened. He'd use the day to trace the canal's hidden corners near that spot, seeking a lock or clue the key might fit, while bracing for the dusk vigil that could draw predator and prey together. The chaos of two crimes now converged on a single, deceptively simple detail. Moreau's habit, always there, waiting to be seen. Maigret turned toward the canal, the fog swirling at his heels, knowing the emerging pattern was both his map and his peril, guiding him closer to a truth the shadows of the syndicate would kill again to bury. The early morning fog over Montmartre lingered like a stubborn ghost as Inspector Maigret made his way toward the canal, the brass key a cold weight in his pocket, and the emerging pattern sharp in his mind. Moreau's habit of pacing under the bridge at dusk, noted by the old vendor Gaston, and echoed in the cryptic note, "They know, Canal at dusk," had crystallized as the nexus of the case, tying his disappearance to the brutal murder of Margot. and the buried secrets of the Canal syndicate of '83, the bridge was no mere backdrop. It was the stage for a ritual or secret worth killing over. A truth the villain like Vasa or his proxy exploited with lethal precision. Maigret knew dusk, mere hours away, could draw him into a deadly confrontation, but the day offered a narrow window to uncover the lock or hide out the key might fit, to grasp the motive before the fog cloaked another victim. As he walked, pipe unlit against the damp air, his resolve was tempered by the certainty that the heart of this crime lay just beyond his reach. Waiting to be unearthed, he started at the bridge, the rusted iron arch looming over the sluggish canal where Margot's blood still stained the ground, a grim reminder of the stakes. The area buzzed with early bargemen, but none lingered long, their glances wary as Maigret scoured the underbelly of the structure. He traced the muddy banks, eyes keen for anything a hidden panel, a rusted grate, a forgotten door that the brass key might unlock. Near the bridge's eastern piling, half submerged in weeds, he spotted a small, weathered hatch, its lock corroded but intact, tucked beneath an overhang invisible from the main path. His pulse quickened as he knelt, brushing aside damp foliage. The key slid into the lock with a faint click, turning stiffly but true. The hatch creaked open, revealing a narrow, dank tunnel descending into darkness. The air thick with mildew, and the echo of dripping water. Maigret hesitated, the fog outside muffling sound as he lit a match from his coat, its flicker casting jagged shadows. The tunnel, likely a smuggling relic from the syndicate's heyday, sloped downward toward the canal's underbelly, its walls scrawled with faded marks codes or signals from a decade past. He descended cautiously, boots slipping on wet stone, until the passage widened into a small, cavernous chamber strewn with rusted crates and rotting burlap. At its center sat a heavy iron chest, its lid ajar, spilling faded papers and tarnished coin bags, remnants of illicit wealth. But it was a leather-bound ledger atop the chest that seized his attention, pages brittle but legible, detailing shipments, bribes, and names tied to the syndicate. Among them, Moreau's name appeared repeatedly, not as a mere clerk, but as a keeper of accounts, entrusted with secrets that could ruin lives. Beside his name, in a later hand, was scrawled a single word, traitor. The word hit Maigret like a cold gust, reframing every fragment of the case. He sifted through the ledger, matches flaring as he read by their fleeting light. Entries from years ago showed Moreau skimming profits, falsifying records to hoard a hidden share greed. Yes, but deeper notes hinted at betrayal. A passage dated months before his disappearance described a confrontation, Moreau threatening to expose the syndicate's remnants, including Vasa, unless paid off. Using the ledger as leverage, later scribbles, in a shakier hand, marked payments ceasing, replaced by warnings of reckoning. Maigret's mind clicked. The motive wasn't just money or revenge, it was existential. Moreau's treachery endangered not just past profits, but the very freedom of those tied to the syndicate. Men like Vasa who'd evaded prison by silence. Killing Moreau wasn't enough. Erasing every trace, every witness like Margot. Every record was a desperate bid to bury a past that could still destroy. He pocketed the ledger, the fog of motive clearing into shocking clarity. Vasa, or whoever acted for him, wasn't driven by simple greed or power. It was survival, a psychology of absolute preservation. The extremes, the meticulous staging of Moreau's room, the stolen evidence. Margot's brutal silencing stemmed from a mind unhinged by the terror of exposure. Willing to murder repeatedly to ensure no whisper of the syndicate resurfaced. Maigret saw the villain's logic now. Moreau's dusk habit under the bridge, likely guarding this tunnel or meeting contacts, made him a predictable target. Margot, witnessing his dealings, became collateral. The evidence theft was to blind. The investigation. Vasa's ruthlessness wasn't just cold, it was pathological. A man who'd built a life on buried crimes and would slaughter to keep it so. Maigret climbed back to the surface, the hatch thudding shut behind him as the morning fog thinned. The canal rippling under a grey sky. The ledger, heavy in his coat, was the key to motive, exposing why the stakes were so deadly. But it also painted a target on him. Possessing it made him the next threat to Vasa's fragile shield. He headed to the gendarmerie to secure the ledger with the other evidence. Wary of every shadow in the mist, the patterned dusk at the bridge now bore a darker edge. Vasa likely knew this tunnel's secret, might stalk it still, waiting for dusk to strike again. Whether it Maigret or remnants, like Lefebvre or Bisset, who could still betray him. At the gendarmerie, he locked the ledger away under doubled guard, the sergeant eyeing him with grudging respect as Maigret outlined the motive's depth. Not just a grudge, Du Bois, he muttered, pipe finally lit, smoke curling in the dim room. It's a man's whole existence at stake, Vasa's freedom, his life since '83. Moreau threatened to shatter it, and anyone tied to that threat dies. We're not chasing a thief. We're hunting a cornered beast. The sergeant nodded, unease flickering, as Maigret mapped his next move. Dusk loomed. He'd return to the bridge, not just to test the pattern, but to lure Vasa, using himself as bait if needed. The motive's revelation shifted the game. Knowing the villain's psychology, paranoia bordering on obsession gave him an edge, a way to predict the next strike. As midday passed, Maigret lingered near the canal, the fog a persistent veil, piecing the villain's mind further. Vasa saw the world as a ledger of risks, each loose end a debt to be paid in blood. Moreau's betrayal, documented in ink, wasn't just personal, it was a fuse to a prison cell or worse, igniting a desperation Maigret hadn't anticipated. The extremes made sense now, the bent bars staged to confuse, the evidence erased to blind, murders to mute. This wasn't mere revenge. It was self-preservation twisted into madness, a man who'd kill an entire past to save his present. He relit his pipe, the fog swirling as dusk neared, the bridge a silent sentinel ahead. The hidden motive, survival over exposure, shockingly reframed every act, revealing Vasa's terror-driven logic. Maigret braced for the evening, knowing the canal at dusk held not just answers but peril, a clash with a mind that saw no limit to what it would destroy. The stakes couldn't be higher. Armed with the motive's brutal truth, he turned toward the bridge, ready to face the beast whose desperation had already claimed 2 lives. Determined to end the bloodshed before the fog hid another grave. The Fog over Montmartre thickened as dusk approached, draping the canal in a ghostly veil that seemed to pulse with the weight of impending reckoning. Inspector Maigret stood near the rusted bridge, the heart of the pattern that had crystallized. The case Moreau's nightly vigils here at dusk, the cryptic warning they know, Canal at dusk, and now the hidden tunnel with its ledger revealing a motive far darker than greed or revenge. Vasa, the spectre of the Canal syndicate of '83, driven by a pathological need to protect his freedom from Moreau's betraying, Expose had orchestrated a ruthless campaign. Moreau's disappearance, Margot's murder, the stolen evidence sold to bury a past that could send him back to prison or worse. Maigret, pipe cold in his hand, felt the pieces align at last. The brass key, the tunnel's secret stash, the ledger's damning truth. With dusk settling, the bridge was no longer just a clue. It was the stage for a final confrontation, a trap he'd set with himself as bait, knowing Vasa's desperation would draw him out. Maigret had spent the waning hours of daylight preparing, his mind as steady as the canal's sluggish flow despite the tension coiling in the air. At the gendarmerie, he'd secured the ledger and evidence under triple guard, wary of another strike, and briefed a select few trusted officers, excluding the negligent Remy on a discreet perimeter. Around the bridge, they were to remain, hidden in the fog, closing in only on his signal, a sharp whistle, ensuring Vasa felt no eyes upon him until it was too late. Maigret carried no weapon beyond a sturdy cane, tucked beneath his heavy coat, relying on wit and timing over force. He deduced Vasa's psychology, a man cornered by fear of exposure. Obsessive in erasing threats would compel him to revisit this nexus, either to guard the tunnel's secret or to silence the detective who'd unearthed it. The trap was simple yet precise. Maigret would linger under the bridge at dusk, mirroring Moreau's habit, appearing vulnerable, inviting the predator to strike as the grey light faded. The canal's murmur blended with the fog's hush, and Maigret took position beneath the iron arch, near where Margot had fallen, the faint stain of her blood still darkening the mud. He stood casually, pipe now lit, smoke curling upward as if lost in thought. Though every sense strained for movement in the mist, the bridge loomed overhead, its shadows deepening, and the distant clatter of Paris receded, leaving only the weight of anticipation. Minutes ticked by, marked by the faint lap of water, until a subtle crunch boots on damp gravel pricked his ears from the western bank. Maigret didn't flinch, keeping his gaze on the canal, but his grip tightened on the cane's hidden heft, ready for the predator's approach. A figure emerged from the fog, tall and lean, a dark cap pulled low over a gaunt face, matching Lefebvre's old description and the syndicate. Photograph? Vasa, at last, materialized, his steps deliberate, a faint limp betraying an old injury. Margot's limping man, no doubt, his eyes, sharp and hollow, fixed on Maigret with a predator's focus, though his hands remained in his coat pockets, concealing threat or intent. He stopped a few paces away, voice low and rough, cutting through the fog. "Inspector, you're a persistent one, prowling the canal at dusk, just like poor Moreau. Curiosity's a dangerous habit." Maigret turned slowly, puffing his pipe, his composure a mask over the tension beneath. "Monsieur Vasa, I presume. I've been expecting you. This bridge holds secrets worth killing for, doesn't it? Moreau's betrayal. Documented in a ledger, I've secured your name tied to enough crimes to bury you thrice over. You vanished him to silence that threat, killed Margot for witnessing too much. But you can't erase every trace, not with me standing here. Vasa's face twitched, a flicker of rage or fear breaking his cold veneer, though his hands stayed. Hidden. You think you've got it all, eh? Moreau was a snake. Thought he could blackmail old ghosts for a fortune. I gave him chances payments, promises, but he pushed, wanted to drag us all down. Had to go. And that hawker, Margot, sniffing. Too close, blabbing to you. I've survived worse than ledgers, Inspector. You've nothing to pin on me, not without bodies or proof. Maigret's gaze didn't waver, his voice steady, cutting deeper. I've the ledger, Vasa, locked tight with the gendarmes. It names you, dates you, damns you. The tunnel under this bridge, unlocked by Moreau's key, hides your pasts. Filth coins, papers, proof enough. You staged his room, bent the bars with grease, dropped the watch to mislead. But dusk here, your killing ground, betrayed you. I'm the last loose end, aren't I? Make your move, or confess before my men close in. The mention of men was a gamble. Vasa's eyes darted, scanning the fog, and Maigret caught the glint of metal as a hand twitched from his pocket, a blade catching the faint dusk light. Desperation flushed. Vasa lunged, aiming to slash and flee into the mist, a final, frantic bid to erase the threat. But Maigret, expecting the strike, sidestepped, cane swinging hard to crack against Vasa's wrist, sending the knife skittering. Into the mud, the tall man snarled, grappling forward, but Maigret's bulk held, pinning him against the bridge piling with a wrestler's grit. He blew the sharp whistle, piercing the fog, and within moments, boots thudded as hidden gendarmes emerged, surrounding Vasa with iron grips before he could twist free. Panting, Vasa glared, defiance crumbling as cuffs snapped tight, the fog swirling impotently round his defeat. Maigret stepped back, cane steadying him, pipe still clenched, as he watched the man's fight drain. It's over, Vasa. Survival drove you fear of that ledger exposing 83, of prison swallowing what's left of your life. You killed Moreau to stop his blackmail, Margot to mute her witness, stole my notes to blind me. But this bridge, Dusk's pull, was your pattern, your mistake. You couldn't resist silencing one more threat. Vasa's hollow eyes met his, a bitter sneer curling. You've got your prize, Inspector, but others know. The syndicate's ghosts don't die easy. Lock me up, someone, or settle the score. His words held menace, but Maigret remained unmoved, knowing the confession, coerced by pressure, and the trap's success, cemented the case. The gendarmes hauled Vasa away, his limp more pronounced now, as the fog seemed to lighten, dusk giving way to night. Maigret lingered under the bridge, relighting his pipe, the tension ebbing though vigilance lingered. He had all the pieces motive of existential dread. The tunnel's secrets, the pattern of dusk, Vasa's own words woven into a net that finally ensnared the predator. Moreau's body might yet lie in the canal's depths. A grim task for dredgers, but justice for him and Margot rested in Vasa's capture. The fog swirled at his heels as he turned from the bridge, composed, despite the night's violence, aware that while this battle ended, Vasa's threat of lingering ghosts hinted at shadows yet to face. For now, though, the canal lay quiet, its dust curse broken, and Maigret walked into the mist, ready for whatever lingered beyond. The fog over Montmartre seemed to retreat slightly as night fully claimed the canal, its murky depths mirroring the quiet that settled after the storm of confrontation. Inspector Maigret stood beneath the rusted bridge, the taste of victory bitter on his tongue as he puffed his pipe, smoke curling into the damp air. Vasa, the spectre of the Canal syndicate of '83, had been ensnared in the trap set at dusk, his desperate lunge with a blade thwarted, his confession under pressure cementing his guilt in Moreau's disappearance and Margot's murder. The motive, a pathological fear of exposure from Moreau's betraying ledger, had driven Vasa to extremes, and the pieces the brass key, the tunnel's secrets. The pattern of dusk under the bridge fit neatly into a resolved puzzle. The gendarmes had hauled him away, his defiant threat of lingering syndicate ghosts ringing hollow as they faded into the mist. Maigret, composed despite the scuffle, believed the case closed, ready to dredge the canal for Moreau's body and file reports by morning. Yet, as he turned from the bridge, a nagging unease pricked at his instincts, a whisper that the fog still hid a final shadow. He trudged back toward the gendarmerie through the winding alleys, cane tapping against cobblestones, the weight of the night's triumph tempered by Vasa's parting words. Others know. The syndicate's ghosts don't die easy. On the surface, it seemed a last gasp of bravado, a caged man's spite. But Maigret's mind, honed by years of untangling deception, churned over the ledger's pages. He'd secured earlier names beyond Vasa's, payments to unnamed figures, hints of a broader network. He'd assumed Vasa the predator, the hand behind every strike. But what if his role was merely the sharp edge, a tool wielded by a subtler mind? The fog seemed to press closer as he reached the gendarmerie, its dim lanterns casting jittery light, and he resolved to re-examine the evidence one last time before sleep claimed him. Inside the squat building, the air was thick with the scent of ink and exhaustion. Maigret retrieved the leather-bound ledger from the evidence locker, under the bleary-eyed sergeant's watch, spreading it across a scarred desk. The flickering lamp illuminated brittle pages, detailing the syndicate's smuggling profits, Moreau's skimming, and the damning note branding him a traitor. Vasa's name appeared as enforcer, tied to violent collections. But another initial, PL, cropped up repeatedly beside larger transactions, marked with cryptic annotations like oversight and final say. Maigret's brow furrowed. He'd skimmed past it in the tunnel's haste, assuming a minor player. But now, with Vasa's threat echoing, it gnawed at him. Who was PL? And why did their entries suggest control over even Vasa's actions? He cross-referenced his mental notes of suspects, pipe cold as he paced the cramped room. Lefebvre, the bargeman, bore no such initials and had fled in fear, unlikely a mastermind. Margot was dead, Garnier to Craven, but Bissett, The accounting supervisor lingered in his thoughts, nervous twitches, the locked drawer, avoidance during Margaret's murder. His full name, Pierre Louis Bissett, clicked with a jolt. PL, hidden. In plain sight, the ledger's overseer, a man positioned to manipulate books and men alike. Margaret's pulse quickened. Bissett had played the pawn, sweating under, claiming ignorance of Vasa's return. Yet his firm held the old syndicate papers, his past tied to Moreau's. Could he be the true architect, using Vasa as a blunt instrument while feigning detachment? He summoned a junior officer to haul Bissett in, despite the late hour, sensing the case teetering on a last, unshaken revelation. While waiting, Margaret revisited the photograph from Bissett's drawer, the syndicate group by the Canal. Bissett, smirking beside Vasa and Moreau. In the grainy image, Bissett's posture, slightly apart, carried an air of command he'd masked in person. A memory flickered Bissett's clipped irritation when shown Moreau's pocket watch, his gaze lingering on the locked drawer as if fearing deeper exposure. Margaret's genius stirred. If Bissett was PL, the ledger's puppet master, then Vasa's crimes were on his orders, a shield for the real power fearing the past's resurrection. Bissett arrived near midnight, dragged from bed, his spectacles crooked and face pale under the gendarmerie's harsh light. He stammered at the late summons. "Inspector, I've told you everything. This is harassment." But Margaret, seated calmly, pipe relit, slid the ledger forward, tapping the PL entries. "Pierre Louis, I presume. The syndicate's overseer, not just a clerk like you claimed. You directed Vasa, didn't you? Moreau's blackmail threatened your empire, not just his freedom. You ordered him silenced. Margot, too, while hiding behind a nervous mask. Vasa took the fall tonight, but you're the mind behind the blood." Bissett's facade cracked, sweat beading as his hands gripped the desk, voice rising. "That's absurd. I'm a victim of old ties, nothing more. You've got Vasa Pinnet on him." But Margaret's stare was unyielding, voice low, cutting through panic. "The ledger names you as final say. Your drawer hid proof. Your absence during Margaret's death too convenient. Vasa confessed to the acts, but hinted at others knowing your shadow. Bissett, you orchestrated this to save your name, your quiet wealth built on syndicate bones. Confess, or I dig until every transaction since '83 buries you deeper than." Vasa. The room hung heavy, the fog outside muffling even breath as Bissett's defiance withered. His shoulders slumped, voice a broken whisper. I couldn't let it unravel. Moreau wanted millions to stay quiet, threatened to spill to the law my deals, my bribes. My life now. I've built respectability, inspector, a family, a firm. Vasa was loyal. Did the dirty work. I told him to make it look like a disappearance. Then Margot saw too much. I had no choice but to clean it all. I'm not a monster, just a man protecting what's mine. Margaret nodded, unsurprised. His genius tested and proven in this final twist. Bissett wasn't the visible predator, but the hidden mastermind. His motive a desperate grasp for a crafted present, more insidious than Vasa's brute survival. The case wasn't open and shut with one arrest. It demanded both cogs, the enforcer and the brain. He signaled the officer to cuff Bissett, who offered no resistance, eyes hollow as he was led to a cell beside Vasa's. Maigret stood, pipe, smoke curling, the fog still pressing at the window as dawn hinted beyond. The last-minute revelation shook the resolution, but Maigret's composure held. Knowing he'd peeled back the final layer of Montmartre's shadows, Moreau and Margot's deaths bore to hands Vasa's violence. Bisset's command tied by a past that refused burial. Reports would be messier now. The syndicate's lingering ghosts a problem for another day. But justice, however jagged, stood. He turned from the desk, the fog outside thinning at last, ready to face the morning's dredge for bodies and the echoes of Bisset's quiet terror, his mind already bracing for whatever deeper webs the syndicate might yet weave. The first hints of dawn crept through the thinning fog over Montmartre, casting a pale, ghostly light across the gendarmerie's grimy windows as Inspector Maigret stood by the scarred desk, the weight of the night's revelations settling into his bones. The last-minute twist had shattered the illusion of a tidy resolution. Bisset, unveiled as the syndicate's hidden mastermind under the initials PL, had confessed to orchestrating Moreau's disappearance and Margot's murder using Vasa as his brutal instrument. The motive preserving a life of respectability built on buried crimes drove Bisset to desperate lengths, his quiet terror a stark contrast to Vasa's raw violence. Both men now sat in cells below, cuffed and broken, their interwoven guilt forming the dark heart of the case. Maigret, pipe smouldering in his hand, felt the exhaustion of the chase. Yet his mind lingered on the final threads the justice to be served, the hidden clues he'd pieced together, and the lingering whisper of the syndicate's ghosts that Bisset and Vasa had warned of in their bitter defiance. As the morning stirred, Maigret oversaw the formal charges, his voice steady as he dictated reports to a bleary-eyed clerk. Under the gendarmerie's flickering lamps, Bisset's confession, rung out in the dead of night, detailed the meticulous plan Moreau, once a trusted clerk, had skimmed funds and later threatened to expose the syndicate's lingering network. Bisset's bribes, hidden accounts, and political ties unless paid an exorbitant sum. Unable to risk such a leak, Bisset had enlisted Vasa, the old enforcer, to stage Moreau's disappearance as a random brawl, bending the tenement bars with grease for effect and planting the pocket. Watch as a false trail to the Canal. Margot, a peripheral figure who'd once run messages for the syndicate, had seen too much of Moreau's dusk dealings under the bridge and hinted at talking to Maigret, sealing her fate with a brutal blow from Vasa's hand on Bisset's order. The stolen duplicate notes were Bisset's bid to blind the investigation, a scheme nearly derailed by Maigret's trap at dusk. The truth was fully revealed now, laid bare in ink and iron. Maigret ensured the ledger, brass key, and tunnel evidence were catalogued as irrefutable proof, tying both men to the crimes. By mid-morning, a dredge team was dispatched to the canal near the bridge, guided by Vasa's reluctant mutterings under interrogation about a weighted body near the eastern Piling. Hours later, they hauled up Moreau's remains, bloated and bound, a grim confirmation of the disappearance's end. Margot's murder, witnessed only by the fog, rested on forensic traces and Bisset's admission, enough for a court to bind. Both culprits, Justice, jagged and cold, took shape as charges of murder and conspiracy were filed. The gendarmes finally aligning behind Maigret's dogged pursuit. Bisset's pale resignation and Vasa's snarling silence in their cells promised a trial, not a flight, securing the outcome Maigret had fought for. Yet, as he stood by the canal at noon, watching the dread team disperse, the fog lingered. Metaphorically in his thoughts, justice was served, but not without an unsettling ripple. Vasa's threat of others knowing, and Bisset's cryptic nod to a broader network, echoed as unfinished business. Maigret knew the syndicates. Roots ran deeper than two men. The ledger hinted at unnamed players, payments to shadowed figures beyond Paris's grime. For now, though, the immediate threat was caged, and he allowed himself a moment's satisfaction. Pipe smoke curling as he turned back to the gendarmerie to finalize his account of the hidden clues that had nearly slipped past even him. Later, gathered with a small knot of officers in the station's cramped briefing room, Maigret explained the overlooked fragments that had ultimately unlocked the case, proving once again why his mind stayed a step ahead. "Gentlemen," he began, voice gravelly but assured, pipe gesturing as he paced. The truth hid in plain sight, masked by staged distractions. The bent bars in Moreau's room greased, not forced, were my first whisper of premeditation, missed by your rush to call it a canal brawl. That grease, a mechanic's trace, pointed to deliberate tampering, not escape. Yet I nearly shelved it, chasing the watch's false lead. Then the dust pattern, noted by old Gaston about Moreau's bridge habit, aligned with the note they know. Canal at dusk, a routine exploited by Vasa. Overlooked until Margit's death at the same spot screamed significance. He paused, relighting his pipe, the smoke a veil for the room's rapt attention. The brass key nagged me, a riddle, ignored amid bodies and thefts, until the bridge's tunnel hatch fit its lock, revealing the ledger. That book named Bisset as PL, a mastermind I'd pegged as a nervous pawn, my blind spot. Nearly fatal. His twitchy fear when I pressed on Vasa masked command. I discounted his absence during Margit's murder as coincidence until the initials clicked, and Vasa's limp, mentioned by Margot before her death, tied to the photograph's tore. Manner detail buried under fog until the trap forced his form from shadow. These clues, small and scattered, wove the net only when I stepped back from the chaos. You saw scraps. I saw a syndicate's desperation. The officers nodded, some grudgingly, as Maigret's dissection laid bare his method patience over haste, instinct over assumption. He'd missed Bisset's role until the 11th hour, nearly letting the trooper-patia slip. But his relentless return to the canal, to Dusk's pool, had cornered both predator and planner. Justice holds today, he concluded, but mark this the ledger's other names. Bisset's hints of wider webs, we've caged to, not the nest, stay sharp. Montmartre's fog hides more than bodies. As evening fell, Maigret lingered by the tenement alley one last time, the fog now a mere wisp under a clearing sky. Pipe warm in his grip, the truth stood. Moreau and Margot avenged, Vasa and Bisset bound for trial, evidence airtight. Justice was delivered, not escaped, yet the unsettled edge remained. A whisper of syndicate remnants Vasa had taunted with. No immediate threat loomed. The cells held firm. The canal yielded its grim secret, and the court awaited. But Maigret's gaze lingered on the bridge's silhouette. Knowing his genius had closed this chapter while sensing another might lurk beyond the mist, he turned toward home at last, the city's clamor returning as the fog lifted. Case notes, heavy in his satchel for the final report. The hidden clues grease, dusk, initials. A limp cemented his edge, a quiet proof of why he pierced shadows others missed. Justice served. Yes, but with a door cracked to future ghosts. Maigret walked into the night, composed amid unresolved echoes, ready for whatever Montmartre's underbelly might next unveil. His pipe smoke trailing like a promise to meet it head-on. The night air over Montmartre carried a rare clarity as the last wisps of fog dissolved under a crescent moon, the city's muted clamor weaving through the narrow streets. As Inspector Maigret trudged away from the tenement alley, his heavy coat sagging with the weight of a long-closed case, justice had been served. Vasa, the brutal enforcer, and Bisset, the hidden mastermind of the Canal syndicate's lingering shadow, sat in cells awaiting trial for Moreau's murder, and Margot's silencing, the truth unearthed through grit, and overlooked clues like the greased bars, the dust pattern under the bridge, and the damning ledger's initials stood firm in the gendarmerie's records. Moreau's body, dredged from the canal's depths, and Margot's blood-stained resting spot bore witness to a resolution Maigret had clawed from the fog. His pipe glowed faintly, smoke trailing behind him like a weary exhale, as he walked toward home. The satisfaction of justice tempered by the syndicate's whispered ghosts, Vasa's threat of others knowing, and Bisset's cryptic nods to a broader network. Though the immediate battle was won, a lingering unease shadowed his steps, a sense that Montmartre's underbelly held more secrets yet to surface. He reached his modest apartment near the Place Begale as the city quieted. Further, the faint glow of gas lamps filtering through his window as he shed his coat and satchel. The final case notes spilling across a worn desk. The day's formalities, charges filed, evidence secured, dredge confirmed had cemented the outcome. And his briefing to the gendarmes, dissecting hidden clues like the brass keys tunnel and Bisset's overlooked initials, had proven his edge once more. Yet, as he lit a fresh pipe, the smoke curling in the dim room, Maigret's mind refused to rest. Drawn back to a minor detail that hadn't slotted neatly into the puzzle's close. It was a small thing, barely noted amid the chaos of arrests and confessions, but it gnawed at him. A stray entry in the syndicate ledger, buried among the payments and names, marked with neither initials nor context, simply reading, lockbox 17, Gare du Nord, debt unpaid. He leaned over the desk, retrieving his scribbled recollection of the ledger's pages from memory. Since the original remained locked at the gendarmerie, the entry, scribbled in a hurried hand unlike Bisset's precise annotations or Vasa's crude marks, stood apart, a reference to a lockbox at the bustling train station, tied to an unspecified debt. Maigret puffed thoughtfully, the smoke a veil for his stirring unease. Neither Bisset nor Vasa had mentioned a lockbox in their confessions. Bissett's admissions centered on Moreau's blackmail and Margot's threat, while Vasa growled only of tasks done under orders. Was this lockbox a forgotten syndicate stash, irrelevant to the murders, or a loose thread to another player? Another debt worth killing over. The case felt resolved, yet this detail unaddressed, unconnected, whispered of a lingering question, a crack in the foundation of closure. Maigret rose, pacing the small room as the night deepened, pipe warm in his grip. He considered the possibilities, his mind as methodical as ever despite exhaustion. Gare du Nord, a hub of comings and goings, would be a logical spot for the syndicate to hide assets or secrets during their smuggling heyday of 83 perhaps documents, coin, or leverage akin to Moreau's ledger. An unpaid debt could hint at a grudge or obligation beyond Bissett's immediate circle. A third party unaware of the arrests, still poised to act. He'd traced the ledger's other names to dead ends or aliases during the investigation. But this lockbox, unmentioned by suspects, felt like a breadcrumb deliberately obscured. A mystery on the horizon he hadn't the time to chase amid the murder's urgency. The fog of Montmartre might have lifted, but the city's shadows seemed to murmur still, teasing a thread beyond this case's end. By morning, after a restless few hours of sleep, Maigret sat over black coffee at his desk, the city stirring beyond his window with the clatter of carts and early shouts. He resolved not to let the detail fester unchecked. Though duty demanded he finalize the current reports before chasing phantoms. A brief visit to the gendarmerie secured a transcribed copy of the ledger's page, confirming the lockbox entry, and he tucked it into his coat with a quiet determination. The immediate justice for Moreau and Margot held Bissett, and Vasa's trials loomed. Their guilt airtight, but Maigret's instinct, honed by decades of peering into Paris's dark corners, urged a footnote to this victory. He'd pass by Gare du Nord in the coming days, perhaps inquire discreetly about Lockbox 17, though he knew it might yield nothing more than dust or a dead end. Yet, the possibility of another syndicate remnant, another unpaid score, kept his gaze sharp. As he stepped into the morning light, heading to the station for final signatures, pipe relit and trailing smoke, a cryptic message of sorts arrived slipped. Under the gendarmerie door overnight, scrawled on coarse paper in an unsteady hand, and brought to him by a junior officer with a puzzled shrug. It read simply, 17 waits. Dead calls, no signature, no seal, just the echo of the ledgers. Lockbox number, a taunt or warning from an unseen hand. Maigret's jaw tightened, the paper crisp in his gloved fingers as he scanned the empty street beyond. The fog long gone, but suspicion heavy in its place. Was this a remnant of Bissett's network? A watcher aware of the arrests, or a new player? Tied to the unpaid debt, the message, vague yet pointed, nudged the lingering question into sharper relief. A hint of another mystery simmering on the horizon. He pocketed the note, face impassive as he entered the gendarmerie, the bustle of morning, reports grounding him. The case of Moreau and Margot was closed, justice delivered with cuffs and confessions, and Maigret's unraveling of hidden clues grease on bars, dusk's pattern. PL's identity left the gendarmes in quiet awe of his edge. the audience of this grim tale could rest satisfied. To killers faced their reckoning, the Canal's secrets dragged to light. Yet, as Maigret signed the final forms, pipe smoke curling in the stuffy room, the lockbox enigma and cryptic message sound a seed of curiosity, an itch beneath the victory. Lockbox 17. Debt calls. What debt? Whose call? It wasn't a threat, not yet. Merely a murmur of unfinished shadows in Montmartre's maze. Maigret stepped back into the street at midday, the city alive with indifferent rhythm. His satchel lighter, but his mind alert. He walked away from the case's epicenter, past the canal bridge now free of dusk's curse, toward routine or whatever awaited. The lingering question of lockbox 17 hung like a faint fog. Not urgent, but persistent, a promise of another tangle. In Paris's underbelly, satisfaction settled in his stride, justice served for now. But curiosity ever, his companion kept his eyes keen, sensing the mystery never truly ends. The next case, whether tied to this debt or another darkness, loomed somewhere ahead, and Maigret, pipe trailing smoke, remained ready to meet it. Hooked by the city's endless shadows,